Hey everyone, this is Finn. Go ahead and open up your first project test, or if you don't have it, open up a new Unity project under version 2019.4.1. Right now, we are in the trigger tests scene. This was left over from the programming with collisions and triggers tutorial. To get to a different scene, open up the scenes folder. Let's right click and create a new scene by going to create and scene. Let's name this Animator Programming and press enter. Double click that scene icon to open it, and you'll make sure that you are in that scene by noting that this says Animator Programming up here in our hierarchy. Now let's go ahead and add a couple of things. First, I want to add some UI elements. They are very simple. Let's add a UI and create a canvas. Double click on that. If you'll recall from my Unity interface video, this white square represents the user's screen. Right click on the canvas, go to UI, and press button. That is going to add a button, and you'll see that when you move it inside of this boundary, this white lined boundary of the canvas, it is going to be obvious that it is the same as our screen if you look down here in the game view. Let's move one button down here. Let's name that button left and press enter. Then you're going to want to open up this triangle to open up a drop-down menu and see that there is a text game object parented inside of the left game object, which is the button. Press text, and you'll see that there is a text component, and right now under text it says button. Highlight that, type left, and then select out of that box. Now you'll see that it says left on this button. Let's close our button game object, click on the left game object and press Control D, and that's going to duplicate that. Scooch that over to the middle, and let's rename this game object Center. Press enter. Open up that drop-down menu. Find the text game object and the text component and type center. Then duplicate that center game object by pressing Control D. Drag that new game object to the right, and we are going to name it appropriately right. Then we are going to make sure the text in the text component matches right. Now we have 3 buttons. Let's add a game object. I'm going to close our canvas game object, right click in the hierarchy, create a 3D object, sphere, and we are going to want to make sure that its position is at 0, 0, 0. See how it is right there, right where we want it to be. Notice that no matter where our main camera and sphere R, they're actually scaled down here as opposed to being where you think they'd be. Our canvas is actually much bigger because it doesn't matter where our canvas is or where these objects are. Our canvas overlays on top of our screen, and our main camera is what our player is going to see. Now let's create some animation. If you have the animation tab already, click on it. If you don't, go to Window up here to your top left, click Animation, and then Animation, and make sure that you drag it somewhere that's easy to get to, like over here next to the console. With this sphere selected, press Create down here in your animation editor. Go back, right now you are in your Scenes folder. Go back to Assets. Make sure that you are inside of your Animations folder instead. And name that Left. Now, let's create a very simple animation by adding a property, dropping down the transform menu, and adding position. We want to go over to the end here where it says 60, which is actually 1 second, 60 milliseconds. You want to make sure this recording button is clicked and selected and that your timeline has this red bar. And then we want to take this red arrow and click and drag to the left. Let's deselect and let's play that animation. It's very simple. It's just the ball moving from the center to the left. Now let's create the same animation, but for the right. Click this drop-down menu by left, press Create New Clip, and it is going to bring up that file explorer again. Make sure you're in your Animations folder. And let's name that Right. And press Enter. Now let's add a property, Transform, Position. Scrub this white line all the way to 1 second or 60 milliseconds. Press the recording button and then use this red arrow to drag along the x-axis, and using the game view as a guide, scroll to the right until it is above this right button, and then deselect your recording button and press play. Perfect. Now let's create two animations for going back to the center. Let's click this drop-down menu arrow here, press Create New Clip, and we are going to name it Left to Center. Now, I want to know exactly where that sphere was when we were at the end of the left animation, because that is where we want to start when we are going from the left to the center. Let's click this drop-down menu here and go to Left. Go to the very end to 60 seconds. Select these two frames and press on your keyboard Control-C. Now go back to your Left to Center animation, and at the very beginning, press Control-V. Now if you move this around a little bit, it'll pop back into place. This is where we are going to start. Now, we also want to know exactly the coordinates of it being in the center, so let's go back to either of the left or right animations and copy the first frame, Control-C, And now we are going to want to paste it as you can see, since there's only one frame here, the scale of this timeline, it used to be, if I was scrolled all the way over here, this was the 1 second mark, or 60 milliseconds, and now it is 6. In order to fix that, we are going to want to press Control V to paste that frame in there, and then click and drag. You're not going to be able to follow it, but it is going to give us more room, if you see there. Keep going. And eventually, you'll be able to get to the correct time again. See, 60 milliseconds or 1 second is where we want this to be. Now let's play our animation. And it's going perfectly from the left to the center. Now let's press Create New Clip. Type right to center. Save. Let's find where the end frame of the right animation is so that we can make it the beginning frame of this animation. Make sure that you are at 60 milliseconds or 1 second. Make sure that these frames are highlighted and press Control C. Go back to your right to center animation and press Control V. And now you see you're starting off at the right. You are going to want to, for ease, I'm going to go over here and put a keyframe. We are going to be able to paste over it, so that we don't shrink our timeline when we re-enter this animation like you saw in the previous left to center. I am going to press Control V and paste the same frame, so it is both the same, but we are going to be able to swap this frame out for the correct one. Let's go to left to center. And let's go to the very end. Make sure that we have that last frame selected and press Control C. Go back to right to center. Go down to this frame. Make sure you are in the right place. Delete it and then press Control V. Now let's look at this animation by pressing play. All right. Now we have an animation for going from center to left and center to right, and then back from right to center and left to center. Now I'm going to show you how we set that up in the animator. Press Control S to save your scene. Click this animator tab up here. If you are not able to see it, make sure you press Window, Animation, and then Animator. It should automatically appear next to your scene window and your asset store window. Right now, left is our default animation, and we don't want that. So let's move these animations out of the way for a moment. And right click, press Create State, Empty, and that's going to create a new state. And that is just the sphere sitting there at its default transform, not moving. Up to the top right in your inspector, you're going to want to click that to highlight New State and rename it Idle. Then you're going to want to right click it, say Set Layer Default State, and then that is going to be the first animation that plays when you press play. To verify that, I will press play now. And since that is the only animation that is set up right now, that's all that'll play. So let's press play again to exit play mode. Now we are going to want to move left to center and right to center out of the way for a moment. Let's put left here and right here. Now let's right click idle, because we're going to start making our transitions. Click Make Transition and left click left to make sure that it is attached. right-click idle, left-click make transition, and left-click right. Now, drag left to center over here and right to center over here. You're going to want to start with left, right-click the left animation, click make transition, and attach that to the left to center animation. Right-click the left to center animation, click make transition, and attach that to idle. Then let's move on to right-click the right animation, click make transition, and attach that to the right to center animation. And then right-click the right to center animation, left-click make transition, and left-click idle to attach that. Now we are going to want to create parameters. Make sure you're clicked on this parameters tab and not this layers tab. And we are going to make conditions for our transitions here. Let's click this plus button and make sure you are selecting trigger. And that new trigger is going to be called left. We are going to select this arrow, the idle transition going from idle to left. You're going to deselect has exit time by unchecking this box. Then you are going to add a condition by pressing this plus button. And it already says left because that is the only parameter right now that exists, and that is true. The left trigger is what we want to be our condition for this left animation. Next, let's add another parameter, make it a trigger, and call it right. And then click this transition going from idle to right. Deselect has exit time, and then press this plus button to add a condition. Notice that it still says left because that is the first parameter. Click this drop down menu and make sure right is selected. Now we are going to want another trigger called center. We only need one trigger called select. We only need one trigger called center, even though we have two animations, one going from the left to center and one going from the right to center, because no matter what, if it's on one of these two, its transition to go back to the center will be through the center parameter trigger. Let's click the plus button, click trigger, and type center. And enter. Now, click on the transition going from right to center, right here, and press the plus button under conditions. Make sure that this condition is the center trigger, and also make sure that has exit time is unchecked. Next, go to this transition right here, going from left to center. Press that arrow, uncheck has exit time, add a condition, and make sure that it is center. Now I'm going to show you how to connect your buttons so that we can press them and that it'll activate different triggers and we'll be able to control the animations. Let's click sphere. And now I want you to go to add component and type sphere animation manager. And these scripts, it doesn't matter what you name them. You do want to name them something that makes sense, but it does not affect the actual program. Press create and add. Now, you're going to want to press these three dots and go to Edit Script. Now we are going to create 3 different methods or functions that trigger different triggers. That way we can connect our buttons to those functions, and when they are pressed, it'll activate those animations. Make sure that you are underneath the start and update functions, not inside of them, but make sure you are still inside of the public class, inside of these 2 brackets here. Select right there and type void, and this time nothing's going to come up. No, there isn't going to be a suggestion that I'm going to have you click on. You are just going to name this function yourself. It is going to be called left anim, and that stands for left animation. And then press shift and then the 9 key to add the beginning parentheses. That'll also add the end parentheses. And then open up that method by pressing shift and then the left bracket key, which will open up the squiggly brackets. Press enter. Notice how the red squiggles left, and that's because that is correct now. This is correct syntax, and syntax is basically the way of saying grammar for programming. It is the correct grammar. It is it makes sense to the computer and to the program and to Unity. Click up here right next to the squiggly bracket under the public class and then press enter. We are going to write a line right here. So far we haven't written a line directly under the class and not inside of a function yet. This is called declaring a variable, and the variable is going to be able to be accessible from any point of the script. You can also create a variable inside of these different little containers, but they will only exist inside of those containers. If that doesn't make sense now, that's okay. It'll make more sense to you later on. But for now, go ahead and make sure that you are outside of any of these methods or functions down here, and that you type public animator anim with a semicolon after it. You always want to make sure that you have a semicolon after a single line like this. If it doesn't end in a squiggly bracket, like being opened and closed, you want to make sure that you have a semicolon afterwards. Now let's press Ctrl S to save and go back to your project. Make sure it's going to load for a second. And now as you can see, anim pops up over here in our component in the inspector, the component for the script, and it says none, and in parentheses animator, because it's looking for an animator. And you're going to want to click right here where it says animator, click and drag down right to this space until it turns blue like you see now, release, and it will now contain the animator for your sphere, which is what we want. So press Ctrl S to save your scene. Now, whenever you refer to anim, the script is going to know that you are talking about the animator. Let's go ahead and click inside of this left anim method and type anim dot set trigger. I'm going to go ahead and click this to finish it. Then you are going to want to open up some parentheses, and as you can see here, it actually is telling me what it wants. It either wants an ID in the form of a number, or if I click this arrow down here, it wants it in the form of a string, and a string is just a fancy way of saying text and letters as opposed to numbers, and that is always given in double quotations. So put 2 quotation marks make sure that inside of those quotation marks is where you're starting to type, and then say left. And now, after that, put a semicolon. Control S. That is going to set off the trigger left. We got to make sure that this is spelled the exact same way as the parameter that we've created over here in our animator. We've got a capital L, and yes, we have it spelled the exact same way. Perfect. Let's go ahead and create a function under that. Type void write anim and then type anim dot set trigger, start the parentheses, put double quotations, and inside of those say write, and end it with a semicolon. Now let's make one last one called void center anim and type anim dot set trigger, and in parentheses and quotations type center and add a semicolon. Press Control S to save your script. And now let's go back to our project. Go back to your scene window. Let's drop down the canvas game object and make sure that you are selecting left. Double click. Now we are going to scroll down and make sure that you are looking at the button component. Make sure that you are clicked on the left game object and not the text game object that is inside of that left game object. You want to be clicking the parent game object called left. And down here where it says on click and with parentheses, you want to press the plus button. Now, as I read here, it says none, an object, in parentheses because it's looking for an object. I know that that is looking for the object with the script on it that we are looking for. Without just selecting it, we want to click and hold so that we don't lose this inspector here. Click and hold and drag to this space until it's highlighted blue and release. And then it says no function. Click this drop down and then go to Sphere Animation Manager, and you're going to notice that none of the three methods that we've created are going to be listed here where it's supposed to be. And that is because, if you go back to your code, because none of these methods are public. So go ahead and click before void and type public and do that for all three of them. And then press Control S to save. And let's go back to our project. Wait for it to load. And now when you press the drop-down menu where it says no function, go to Sphere Animation Manager. It is going to have all three of our functions right here. Let's go ahead and click left. There we go. And now let's press play. In the game view, press left, and you'll see that it moves our game object to the left, but it is looping over and over again. We want it to move to the left and stay there. So let's exit out of play mode. Go to your animator by clicking the tab. Double click on left and deselect this box where loop time is checked. Uncheck that box. You're going to want to make sure that all of your animations are not looping. So go ahead and uncheck loop time in all of these animations, except for the idle animation. And now let's try again. press left, and it moves to the left. It's not going to work on any of the other buttons so far because we need to connect them still. So let's do that. Press right, scroll down to the button component, click the plus button, and drag your sphere game object to the object panel over here, the little input box. Press the drop-down menu where it says no function, select the script, Sphere Animation Manager, and then click Write Anim. Now Control S to save. Let's press play again. Now let's press write. There we go. And you'll notice that if you press left, it's not going to go to the left. And that's because right now we only have transitions going from center to right, center to left, and then left to center, and then right to center. I'll show you how to deal with that in a moment. But first, let's connect our center button to a function. Press plus. Select the center button. Press this plus symbol. Drag the sphere object to where it says none. Select your script, and then select center. So let's press Control S and press play. Let's press left, center, right, center. As you can see here, now you can move from each one. Exit play mode. Now I'm going to show you what to do if you want it to go from right all the way to left. Right-click left, select Make Transition, and add another transition to left to center. Click that, and notice that we have two transitions now. We have that bottom one, which is the one that has the center trigger as its condition, and then we have the top one. I want to make sure that the top one has an added condition that is the right parameter, the right trigger parameter. Now we have two different conditions. One where the center trigger could be clicked, and the other where the right button can be hold on. One condition where the center trigger is triggered, and the other condition where the right trigger is triggered. Now let's press play. Click left, and then click right. So you have to click it twice, but it still moves one space to the right. Let's make sure that you can move to the left as well. Exit play mode. Right-click the right animation, make transition, and connect that to the right to center. Click the different arrows here. It doesn't matter which, they are all one line now. The different arrows is just to show you that there are multiple transitions there. We see that it says two transitions. We have one where the center trigger is the condition, and make sure you're selected the one where the list is empty. Press the plus button, and then make sure that left is selected. Now let's press play. And that's how you program with animations. Thank you, and have a great day.